Hi, everyone. I'm Carla Ritz. I am the Director of Special Projects for the Montana Institute. We are so honored to get to be with you. This has been such a fun project to work on, great people, and it's really exciting what we've uncovered. And you're already inspiring other states across the country with what you have discovered in your data. And so we're excited to share it back with you and to hear from you. I am going to start us off after we do some introductions with an exercise in spirit. And so I'm going to ask you to get ready in the chat box to chime in just a minute. So just preparing you for that. Again, my name is Carla. I am new to the Montana Institute just this year, earlier joined, loving this work. Came from early childhood advocacy, working with an ACEs coalition actually in Northern California across the region and the state. And now I am a proud resident of Rothsay, Minnesota, population 510. So I'm joining you from my home office there. And Jeff, do you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself briefly?
Hey, everyone. I'm in Bozeman and director of the Montana Institute. Our passion in our work has been, and we're going to unpack some of this, around what we call the science of the positive framework. And that's the framework that actually led to the development of the HOPE research and HOPE science that we're going to be talking about. That came about from some work when I and other colleagues were engaged at the CDC in a 5-year think tank. And so we apply that work by looking at positive community norms. Again, we'll touch on some of these things. It's an honor to be here, and then I'll kick it over to you, Scott.
Hello, good morning. I'm Scott Groppensberger. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Washington. I work in the School of Medicine and in the Center for the Study of Health and Risk Behavior, which is a pretty broad way of saying that we study a lot of different prevention science topics. And that's certainly true of myself. Most of my work has focused on substance use, mental health, and other similar risk behaviors. A lot of my work is actually more on the academic sphere. So we're publishing a lot in academic journals, scientific manuscripts. So for me, this has been a really good opportunity to work with Jeff, Carla, and the team at the Montana Institute with some folks that have a bit more investment with their boots on the ground rather than, a lot of times the journal articles will get sort of lost in the ivory tower. So it's been really fun for me to use my background in developmental psychology and prevention science to work with this team to have a bit more impact with our research.
All right, let's dive in. I warned you, we're going to start with spirit first. Spirit, when I refer to that, I'm talking about what gives us energy, the things that bring us hope, the things that tie us back to our purpose and our why, and help us to really engage with who we are as people in the work that we're doing. So I have just a little bit of a story for you about myself to draw you in and to this topic, right, of positive childhood experiences and what's possible when we start measuring them and what we find out. So this is where I grew up. You can see on the map on the left, in the north is Utah, and then there's the border of Arizona, and just below that is Lake Powell. And I grew up in Page, which is a tiny little town back then, only about 3,500 people. And on the right, you can see that zoomed in, and there's this white road that you can see that goes from the Hyatt in the north down to La Quinta, those two hotels, and that road sort of circles around to the highway. And what you don't know from this map is that that's a mesa. So everything on top of that mesa is sort of the town of Page. And that circle, that blue circle down below, is the trailer park at the bottom of the mesa where I grew up. And I came from a family where both of my parents experienced abuse as children, and they both said that stops here with our generation. The next generation won't experience that. And so this is me at 12 in the middle there, surrounded by my brother and a few cousins of mine who were older than I was. You can see we're sitting on the stoop at my grandparents' house, which has a bunch of sheet metal sort of propped up over the gap at the bottom of the house to keep the armadillos out because they lived in Mississippi. So this is my dad's family's home. And he grew up in poverty, and also was trying to turn the tide there too. And so I had a childhood that, the data might have said that I was in trouble, right? That I was at risk, we like to say, because of those factors. However, I was surrounded by people who were pouring into me what we now call positive childhood experiences, right? So this little girl that I was, when I brought home my first A on a test in Spanish, my Spanish class, my dad came home from his 12-hour shift at the power plant, and he looked over that test as I proudly presented it to him. And I, knelt down in front of him, as was my practice, and unlaced his work boots for him. And he reached down and tilted my chin up and looked me in the eye, and he showed me that paper, and he said, "You're really good at this." He said, "One day you could be an interpreter at the United Nations." Here I was. I mean, remember that picture I showed you? I'm in this trailer park in the middle. What you maybe don't know about Arizona and where that is, I was 2.5 hours to the closest shopping mall. I mean, not only was I not even in town, the town that I was closest to was in the middle of nowhere. And I was coming from this blue collar, rough background, and I had people in my life, and it wasn't just my parents. I had librarians and teachers and coaches and people in my faith community who were pouring into me in a positive way. And so one example of that is just the summer before the 1984 Olympics, when I spent, this is not me, so get no delusions of grandeur here. It's a great photo. I spent a whole summer doing cartwheels back and forth in front of that trailer in the middle of nowhere, knowing I would be an Olympic gymnast, right? I would be discovered. The next car that drove by was surely a coach who was going to discover me, right? So this attitude of anything is possible and why not me is something I grew up with and was a gift in my childhood. And I'm just asking us today, as we step into this together, to consider one of these two questions. What is one positive childhood experience that still influences the way you approach your life today? That's the first. And if you're not really keen on reflecting on your childhood this morning or this afternoon, that's okay too. Not all of us had a lot of these PCEs poured into us, but I'd venture to guess that you are trying your best right now, or have in the past, to pour positive childhood experiences into other children in your life. So think right now for just a moment. What is either one positive childhood experience that you had that still influences your life, or what's one that you're trying to pour into another child that you hope is going to influence their future? And if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat, we would love to hear some examples. My mother always believed in giving back to the community. We volunteered as a family, and I still do today. Thank you, Tina. We know that community traditions and being tied to your community is a positive childhood experience. That's awesome. Granny always said, life is what you make it. Thanks, Terry. Love that you have agency in your life, that your grandma instilled that in you. All your cousins and aunties are a second family. Fantastic. We know a positive childhood experience is having 2 non-parental adults, at least, right, who are pouring into you. So that's a great example, Amber. My toddler gets my positive attention every single time he asks for it, when he's sweet and when he's cranky. Thank you, Anna. That is awesome. You're pouring it forward into the next generation. Oh, parents that read to you. Love that. Doing music and skits and games. Great grandma passing down a saying that we still use. Many hands make light work. We use that one too. Anna, thank you. Lots of reading, being present, community involvement, team sports, making pancakes together. I still love the quality time of cooking and baking together. Thank you, Jenna. The love of the outdoors and adventure. We made these funny family videos every Thanksgiving with my cousins. We would watch them and die laughing. I wish I could see one of those, Sarah. That's awesome. all of these things are so valuable, and that's what we're digging into today is what impact that has had in Montana. Oh, I love it. They keep coming in. This is so great. Thank you for contributing. Fantastic. Oh, crepes, family dinners. That's huge. Coffee with us in the evenings, asking questions. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. We are going to move from spirit into science, and I will turn it over and stop sharing and let Jeff provide sort of a background for where all of this came from with the science.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just queuing some things up here. And thanks so much, Carla. So what I'm going to do here is give you about a 10-minute snapshot of what is typically an all-day institute where we unpack the science of the positive framework and positive community norms. And so why this is important is as we unpack the work and where we're headed in the presentation, and you'll see why here, we always go spirit, science, action, return. And so as we're getting into the science, we want to establish the framework. What's the lens that we're looking through? And then we're going to unpack it a little deeper through Carla going into some of the specifics of how hope emerged. And then we're going to get into really get into some of the specifics with Scott presenting the data and the outcomes from the Montana work. So the science of the positive framework, when we talk about this, we're talking about a focus on and studying positive factors, both individually and as cultures, as organizations. So we're looking at what's working well, right? Strengths, protective factors, what's working well for us individually and across systems. There's an entire framework that guides this work, and we're not going to unpack all of this here, which we do in other settings. But what I want you to see with this is two things, really. First, I want you to see that we start with a focus on the positive in the center. And then we're going to unpack it through some different types of specific steps. And when we focus on the positive, the reason we do this is we have a core assumption that which is like the deepest central belief that we get into. Like if we tap down through our beliefs, our thoughts, we're going to get to this taproot, this core assumption. For us, everything works from this. We believe the positive exists. It's real, and it's worth growing. So we're going to focus on the positive. And I want to say this right off. In doing so, we are not by any means negating concerns, risks, ACEs, trauma, historical trauma. Those are real. Those are real. Those concerns are real. It's just not where we're going to focus our attention. We're going to focus our attention on growing the positive. We do this by starting with this cycle of transformation, which you're already starting to encounter here. We go spirit, science, action, return. As Carla said, when we start with spirit, we essentially start from the heart. We're coming from our why, who we are, that which gives us hope and energy. It was by design that we started with the spirit of these positive childhood experiences that we just put into the chat box. Then we move from that into the science, the data, how we're going to look at the world through a scientific methodology, which then leads us into best practices or actions, right? Evidence-based, science-informed, whatever it may be. And then we come around to this place of return or reflection, evaluation. How are we doing? Did we get the results we want? What worked well? Where are there gaps, right? And we just continue to work through this cycle. So we're telling you this so that you have an understanding of the lens we're working from in all of the work. So this cycle of transformation sets up these kinds of questions for us. What will be the essence or the tone or the spirit of the work? What's going to be our relationship to the science? And from the science, what actions then emerge? Best practices, policies, programs. And again, what are the returns? What's the ROI, the return on investment that we seek? It's very strategic when we talk about spirit first. If we think about the Montana meth campaign on the left, for example, it communicates a particular spirit or tone with this image, right? And we can spend time generating different emotional reactions from this that, emerge from anything from desperation to hurt to sadness to shame, whatever it may be. And we can look at the spirit or the tone of the image on the right: connection, love, friendship, safety, right? So the spirit of what we start to put out and the lens that we look through is very important, because it establishes this very important context for us. Everything we do then will operate through this order of operations. The spirit, science, action, return. We'll be very strategic then as we start to go from data out into applied actions. Like in this case, this was one of our projects several years ago in a Minnesota community. And you can see how this will start to show up literally on the side of a bus, right? So going from data to message, this is something that we do as well. Again, risk and protection are living side by side. The positive exists, the protections exist, so do the risk. It's important for us to recognize hope and concern are always both existent. And the way that we're looking at it, spoiler alert, folks, in terms of where we're headed, while we know about ACEs, we know a tremendous amount about ACEs and their prevalence, and we continue to learn more, right? We're starting to also now develop data and understand more about PCEs, positive childhood experiences. It seems that both are always present as well. We're going to focus on the positive, however, with this belief and this operation that if we want health, we're going to need to promote health. And so I'm just going to say that again. If we want health, we need to focus on, invest in, market, speak about, create narratives for, develop policies around, and promote health. We don't get to health just by chipping away and focusing on unhealth, right? We need to actually focus on it and promote it. And we do this by focusing on perceptions, especially perceptions of norms, but really guiding public perceptions, because the perceptions will pull the narratives. We're constantly looking at hearing and steering the public dialogue based on the perceptions. And that's what these data that we're looking at can help us to do. Another core element of what we're looking at is we believe solutions exist when we come together in community. And so the solutions are already available to us if we can understand how to come into community and listen and mobilize and honor the cultures and the people and the traditions. The solutions are here. They're here. They're here in Montana, and we can start to utilize data to uncover these. So out of the science of the positive, we developed the positive community norms approach, which starts to look at these 4 steps where we're going to uncover the positive. We're going to measure gaps or disparities, especially around perceptions, misperceptions. Then we'll challenge those in different ways to measure increases in health. So this framework is also in operation behind the scenes with all of our HOPE research. And you can see those 4 areas: uncovering the positive, measuring the gaps, challenging the misperceptions, and increasing health. So again, this is part of a all-day presentation, but I wanted you to see a snapshot of what we want to do. We're going to ask these kinds of questions. So what are the positive community norms we want to grow? Spoiler alert, you're going to see some positive norms from the BRFIS data when Scott starts to unpack these. So we did work with the CDC and developed, they commissioned us to write this publication several years ago on how to promote positive community norms for positive parenting. I just put this out there. This is available at the CDC, or Bree can get this to you if you're interested. But this is how we start to put those steps into action that you saw in the circle, okay? This is where we basically start to strategically unpack how we grow positive community norms. So these are the main 4 steps. The positive exists, so we're going to find data to uncover. We're going to measure and look at gaps, especially gaps in misperceptions, which we're going to challenge in different ways to measure these increases in health. So when we talk about a norm, we're talking statistically, it's above 50%, right? Because if it's at 50, it's an average. If it's below, it can be very significant, but it's not a norm. So the reason this is important is it's because all of this HOPE research emerged out of us doing positive community norms work in Wisconsin with the Wisconsin Children's Trust Fund through the leadership of Jennifer Jones, who's now at Prevent Child Abuse America. Here's an example. We saw that statewide across Wisconsin, the norm was that 70% of Wisconsin adults strongly agreed with this norm of improving the well-being of children in the state. However, only 28% of these same folks thought most other adults across the state were perceived and felt the way they did. So here we have this norm of 70%. Sure, there's room to grow to 100, but what we have here is a big gap and a big opportunity. And then they could start to steer conversations towards a positive norm, like this kind of a publication here, focusing on that 70% that they want to increase. Here's another example of norms and misperceptions from work with Jim McKay in West Virginia. Most parents here, 70%, agreed that babies should be in safe sleeping environments, right? Pack and play, firm mattress. However, 83% of the same parents didn't think most other parents across the state would strongly agree. And 97% of the home visitation providers didn't think most parents would strongly agree. So here again, we start to see gaps between the norm and what people perceive is acceptable or what others are doing. Our work then starts to mind that gap. We start to look at anytime we have gaps, right? Like gaps in terms of health disparities, there's an energy and an opportunity. Same thing here. Here's an example with work we're doing with across the state of Missouri with the Missouri Children's Trust Fund. And they're focusing based on similar kinds of data analysis, looking at gaps. They're focusing on the fact that the majority of Missouri adults and parents want to be speaking to their kids about personal boundaries around preventing sexual abuse. This is to counteract and to correct that misperception. Here's an example then of what this translates into as a short public service announcement, one of many they put together.
Having conversations with your child that could help prevent sexual abuse might feel uncomfortable, but not only are these conversations vital, they are normal. 86% of Missouri parents and caretakers have had conversations with their children about their own bodies and personal boundaries. So start small.
My body is my own.
Because conversations about personal boundaries are powerful, something we agree on. Everyday conversations help prevent child sexual abuse. Having conversations.
So this is these are just examples of how we could translate these norms data into messages to start correcting misperceptions and channel these conversations. So Science of the Positive framework, positive community norms framework, then set up our work for what we were doing with what that has become research on hope, health outcomes from positive experiences. Carla, I'll go back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. I am sharing once again. Here we go. All right. I am quickly going to do an overview just for all of us around ACEs and PCEs to tee up Scott to bring you the latest data right from Montana. So what if the positive has lasting impact similar to trauma, right? This is the question. This is the question that we wanted to find out more about specifically in Montana, but this is the question that has been posed now for several years around looking into the impacts of positive childhood experiences. This is something that is incredibly important to me in my previous work in Northern California, where I was working in a county that had the odds, the data said the odds were stacked against us and our children's success. The largest city in our county was Clear Lake. It was also the poorest city in California, and we had all of the negative data that you can imagine related to reading levels and health outcomes and ACEs. And we also had natural disasters, lots of them, wildfires, floods. And so we were looking for a solution that was more powerful than our problems, because all we heard about were the negatives constantly. And so as a prevention advocate, an early childhood advocate, I started reading, and I came across Balancing Adverse Childhood Experiences with Hope, authored by Dr. Robert Segge, Christina Bethel, and Jeff Linkenbach, and others. And I started to get really excited, as I know many of you have as well, as you've encountered this work. And then next came the article in JAMA Pediatrics, Positive Childhood Experiences and Adult Mental and Relational Health, and how that impacted adults, and the science that they uncovered from the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Survey, which was 6,188 Wisconsin adults. And they found that not only that the prevalence of positive childhood experiences in those first 18 years of life correlated with lower rates of adult mental and relational health disorders, but even more important to a community like the one I was trying to serve, that finding held true regardless of how many adverse childhood experiences a person had. That was critical to me. And you can find these publications at our website as well. Very briefly, I know you're all mostly familiar with this science, but we had known and fixated for years on this data about adverse childhood experiences in the first 18 years of life. And you can see those depicted on the left, the original 10 ACEs that were studied, and the negative possible risk factors in adulthood, and how that dose-response relationship existed, where the more ACEs you had, the more likely you were to have these negative physical, mental, behavioral health outcomes as an adult. And we were immersed in this information, and it was no wonder to us in our community that we did have both higher rates of ACEs and the lowest health outcomes in our state in the Robert Wood Johnson County Health Rankings. We needed an antidote to ACEs. And as it turned out for us and for all of us now, we know more that the positive is real, and it's really a big part of the solution in all communities, specifically those that are struggling the most. Of course, the original ACEs study was a point in time, and since then we've learned so much more, right? Our knowledge has become so much more nuanced. I don't know if you've seen this graphic before. There are several graphics out there that exist that have tried to help us embrace a larger view of adversity in childhood. I like this one, which was created by North Carolina's Partnership for Children last year. And you can see that in addition to the original 10 ACEs, that happen to children at times, there are also atrocious cultural experiences, right, in our nation's history, such as slavery and colonization, genocide, forced family separation, segregation, harmful social norms that continue to have negative effects that linger in the bloodstream of our country and have led to adverse community experiences that you can see in those roots. Things like poverty and violence and poor housing quality and affordability, discrimination, lack of opportunity, economic mobility, and social capital, which disproportionately impacts particular groups of people and forces them to the margins of society where privilege and power are hard to come by. Meanwhile, we're also increasingly experiencing these adverse climate experiences, right? Wildfires and climate change and environmental injustice and pollution, all of these sorts of things are also literally in the air we breathe. You can see COVID-19 is also included in that in this graphic. And as we've learned since 2020, we are all in the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat, right? And this is playing out now as we continue to learn more about ACEs and this original pyramid that on the left depicts the negative health impacts of unmitigated ACEs over a lifetime. The knowledge is growing and growing, and we've been further nuancing this. On the right, you can see more knowledge built on top of this about greater attention to the very real impacts of generational embodiment of historical trauma as well. So this is our concern, right? The concern is real too. The positive is our antidote. This is where we focus on health to grow health. So what is our path forward? Well, 7 positive childhood experiences were measured in this child and youth resilience measure, which is this culturally inclusive, well-validated resilience instrument. This is what was used in that Wisconsin study. And the survey respondents considered each one, and they responded about whether they experienced each PCE or positive childhood experience, never, rarely, sometimes, often, or very often during the first 18 years of life. And you can see what those are in this image. And the results were conclusive, right? The more positive childhood experiences you reported, the less likely you were to experience depression or poor mental health in adulthood. And as I shared before, this held true regardless of how many ACEs you had in your background. And on these graphs, you see the percent of adults reporting depression or poor mental health by both the number of ACEs and the number of PCEs. And you can see those split out, right? And what's most exciting to me is that those who reported 4 or more ACEs or adverse childhood experiences were the most profoundly affected by positive childhood experiences. Their risk of depression or poor mental health dropped from nearly 60% among those who recalled 2 or fewer positive childhood experiences to 21% in those who had at least 6. The ACEs data alone doesn't tell us a complete picture, right, about the children in our community and their potential. And these studies open a new doorway to hope. This is the same information, just displayed in a different way. And that downward trend line is so important as we think about our children's future and what we can do to promote health through positive childhood experiences. And also expressed as an odds ratio, right? So adults who report experiencing 6 or 7 of these positive childhood experiences had 72% lower odds of reporting depression or poor mental health than those with 0 to 2. So we know that positive childhood experiences mitigate the effects of ACEs and prevent toxic stress. And because of this, we would be wise to measure them, right, with the same frequency that we're measuring ACEs. And that's exactly what you did in Montana. And we know that the progression of ACEs to toxic stress to negative child and adult health outcomes can be intercepted and mitigated by these PCEs at any point along the continuum to lead to better health outcomes. The DNA of hope is the science of the positive framework, and hope is our strategy based on this. We want to grow the positive experience and norms in children, adult systems, and cultures. So hope science emerged. We see those red and green arrows side by side. We know that negative and positive experiences shape our brains, I shouldn't say but, Jeff is always teaching me, it's yes and positive experiences are also improving health. They help us heal, and they're just more fun, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Scott so we can hear more about understanding hope in Montana. Are you guys seeing his screen now? Perfect.
Just had to find the unmute button. Thanks, Carla. So I met Jeff and his team a little over a year ago, and it's been a wonderful relationship. Just getting on board with all of this exciting work on positive community norms. I'm learning a lot on the fly as well about all of this. And Jeff and I basically put our heads together with one of our colleagues, Jason Kilmer, and just said, what else? What else can we learn about this hope, this healthy outcomes of positive experiences? Where do we want to take this next? And so we just spent a lot of time brainstorming and thinking about what we can each bring to the table in terms of our own expertise, and thinking about what other distal health outcomes might be related to positive childhood experiences. And so a lot of that conversation was like, well, what are some of the pressing health priorities right now? What do we really need to be focusing on in an best case scenario? Really just being realistic. What do I have expertise in, right? What can I actually bring to this team? And so through this, we kind of came to a decision point where it was like, clearly what we need to understand is if PCEs might be protective against substance use behaviors. We know substance use is, and broadly defined, whether that's tobacco, nicotine use, alcohol use, other forms of substance use. This is a big issue in our country, and it's one that we just are having trouble making a lot of progress on from an intervention standpoint. So what was nice about this is we actually get to approach this from more of a prevention standpoint, which is always my preference as a preventionist, as someone who's trained in prevention science. What can we do to prevent these things before it is too late, or when possible? So what we know from decades of literature is that ACEs do put people at risk for substance use later on in adulthood. This is pretty clear, and this has been something that's been a lot of focus, but it does get back to what Carla and Jeff have focused on, is that health is not always to be approached from this negative stance. It should also be approached from this positive point of view, right? So we were wondering whether these positive childhood experiences might also have associations with adult substance use in a protective sense. And so what we've done in the last year since I met Jeff is we came up with this really nice study that it just got accepted in the Journal of Community Health. So it is in press. I don't, that's as much as we know, it just got accepted. Was it last week? Maybe the week before. So we got to go through all the final steps, but people are interested in this. This is something that the scientific community is taking note of, as you've seen in that JAMA article that Carla was describing, and now here in this Journal of Community Health. So these are the Montana data that I'm going to go over with you that are indeed hot off the press. So when we look to study this, we have this existing data. You've heard it several times now. It's the BRFS, we refer to it as, and it is the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System. And it is a telephone survey that a lot of states do, actually all states do it, and communities get a chance to, if they have the ability to afford it, they can put in their own set of questions. And in Montana, you all have decided to put in these positive community or positive childhood experience items, which is a wonderful opportunity for us to study a variety of different health behaviors. So looking at these data from Montana, we see that, well, here's a general breakdown of the race, ethnicity, and birth sex, but I just want to point out that in the analyses, it's weighted to basically make the data representative of Montana, regardless of how many people from these different categories participated. And specific to age, you see we have a wide spread of people. So one thing about this measure is we're asking people to refer back to their childhood experiences. And so something that we would like to know a little bit more about in the future, but aren't quite there yet, is just looking at how well people do recall these childhood experiences. If you're up in your 70s and 80s, you're referring back to something that was 60 years ago. Something that we, Jeff and I have gone around about this is, even if you don't remember things exactly how they were, it's sort of the memory of them that's impacting your day-to-day life now. And this is a psychological framework that we are sort of buying into more and more as we think about these positive childhood experiences. So Jeff has this kind of funny saying, it's never too late to have a good childhood. And so I'll let him speak more about that probably at some point, but I really like that point of view, right? That it's more about how we reflect upon our childhoods. So, okay, so getting into what we found. So first, a descriptive overview of these positive childhood experiences. And so these are the ones that Carla just broke down for us. There's 7 of them. And as you can see, for each one of these childhood experiences, more individuals reported having experienced them than not. So the first step is like, hey, this is a positive community norm. Most Montana adults do report having positive childhood experiences. And so this is something that we want to encourage folks to recognize, just that this positive does exist, and we can also make improvements, right? Especially for some of these are more clear than others. So while this is a positive community norm, there is room for improvement. And then getting into how these childhood experiences related to substance use behaviors later in life, we basically broke it down into all the different substances that we had access to in the BRFIS, which is several smoking items, tobacco use, several indices of alcohol use, and then not in the paper, we also got into some more illicit drug use as well, which I will share here. Again, not in the paper though. So the way that we categorize these, we categorize people into low positive childhood experiences, mid and high positive childhood experiences. And this is just basically based on how many of those experiences they endorsed. Then we calculate odds ratios. They're adjusted, controlling for things like birth sex, controlling for socioeconomic status, several other control variables. And so what we found is that for lifetime smoking, there's really strong effect here. Those that were high in PCEs were at the lowest risk of ever having been a lifetime smoker. You see this sort of linear trend, almost a dose response association, where the more positive childhood experiences, the more favorable the outcome. So we see significant effects when comparing both low to mid and low to high. And these are really strong odds ratios. These are extraordinary effect sizes. And then similarly, instead of being a current smoker, we see a similar pattern. Those with high PCEs during their childhood, much less likely to be a current smoker at the time of the BRFIS survey. Moving into alcohol use, the first indice is total drinks in the past 30 days. See this sort of linear effect as well. PCEs appear to be protective of drinking quantity in terms of drinks per occasion as well. So this is not just frequency, but when they do drink, how much do they drink? See that on average, those with the high PCEs significantly lower than those with low PCEs. Looking specifically at binge drinking, which is 4 or more drinks for female, 5 or more drinks on occasion for males. See again these really strong effects, just where not necessarily that low PCEs is a risk factor as much as it is that high PCEs is a protective factor. You know, it's kind of a two-sided coin, but we like to look at it as high PCEs and experience these can be protective. And then also their peak drinking occasion in the past month, another very strong effect. And finally, something that we actually hadn't looked at for the paper, but Bri and her team said, you know, maybe what about this? What about next step? We wanted to look at just lifetime report of any illicit drug use. And so we're somewhat limited here to what the BRFIS has survey items on. And so we don't have individual breakdowns for specific types of illicit drugs, but there is an item there that says, you know, any illicit drug use and a list of illicit drugs ranging from, you know, cocaine, heroin, misuse of prescription drugs, etc. And we saw this incredible effect here, right? So adjusted odds ratio is almost unprecedented in epidemiological research like this. Those with high PCEs, much less likely to have ever used an illicit drug in their lifetime. And then the next thing we wanted to do with these data is actually break down not just the quantity of their PCEs, but also how each specific positive childhood experience might relate to these behaviors. The reason why it might be valuable to break it down is it makes it a little bit easier for us to make positive community norms messages. So it might not just be, you know, giving your kids childhood experiences that they reflect positively on, but specifically breaking it down. You know, for example, here for drinking in the past 30 days, we can actually say that those who felt safe and protected by an adult in their home at significantly lower risk for drinking alcohol later in or for using alcohol heavily in adulthood. So just the ability to break this down. For most of these, the item by item were significant. These associations are significant at the item by item level, especially looking at cigarette use. You can see just the difference in those in the bottom in the gray who reported never having experienced this particular PCE versus those in blue who reported it very often or often during their childhood. And you can just see across the board that all of these items in their own right do seem to be protective, but then gives us the ability to actually speak to these from a community norms perspective. And then same was true for the illicit drug use. And it's just, I mean, like half, more than half, these effect sizes are just incredible. We were really, really encouraged and really excited about this. So now I just want to kind of situate these findings. So obviously these are really exciting from my perspective as someone who likes to publish scholarly research, but what does it mean from a prevention standpoint? And I'm trained in a translational science framework where we know it's a continuum, right? The end goal is certainly prevention, but how do we get there? It's all these steps along the way, starting with discovery. So what are these basic associations? And then we need to know for whom and why does this association exist? Then it goes through all these steps of intervention development, optimizing the intervention, making it work for everybody, making it work strongly for everybody. Then, of course, disseminating these interventions, getting people to actually buy into them and adopt them. And so these are all really important steps. And just to be clear, from my point of view, we are mostly still here with this PCE literature, and that's okay. Some of the next steps that I'd like to see us take in this area of research are measurement, right? We have these 7 items, but how well do these really represent a cohesive construct? Are there subdomains that we could be measuring differently or better? Identifying these correlates, what other healthy outcomes can we expect to see from these positive childhood experiences? So I'm really excited about where we're at. And then as Carla reminded me the other day, just because we have all these other steps to go doesn't mean we can't start making strides towards the end goal. This is why we like to partner with groups like Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, because sometimes we can skip some of these steps, right? Although we're not going to be able to put forth a specific intervention by skipping some of these steps, we can still try to jump ahead and work towards prevention by just saying, hey, these are childhood experiences that we should be endorsing, that we should be encouraging. Mothers, parents, teachers, classmates, everybody should be working towards. And so with that, I just want to thank the team and then pass it back over to Carla.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for joining us today and being here to answer questions too. We move from spirit science to action. And as Scott said, there's so much opportunity to act even in these early stages. Some of the recommendations that we had put forth in the executive summary for this project, let me pull those up, and I'd love to shift from this to hearing from you all about any big ahas and things you're thinking about our next steps. So let's see. So we talked about positive community norms campaigns, right? Maybe that's a first step, a next step, about the existing norms of positive childhood experiences that are already present in Montana to encourage others and to make sure that any gaps are narrowed. We talked about funding and promotion of evidence-based programs and services that already include education about PCEs and beefing up those as well. So home visiting programs, positive parenting classes, things that some of you are probably already involved in. This data gives you new legs to stand on and to promote and to fund this work. Equitable adjustments in processes and policies, right? We want to have as many people as possible benefit from this and have nothing stand in their way. So these were just a few of the initial recommendations after we viewed this data, and we are incredibly excited about what you're going to come up with in your own communities. We know the solutions are where you are at. So just bringing it back to a return and wanting to hear from you. You can come off of mute or put things in the chat if you have questions, if you have any big ahas or thoughts about what's next. We would love to hear it.
Thank you so much, Carla. That was a great presentation. One of the things that this ACEs and Resiliency Working Group with the State Health Improvement Plan has been working on a lot over the last 2 years is putting together a Montana-based website about ACEs and resiliency specifically for what you just presented, right? Like Montana-specific data and actions for Montana-specific communities, not just relying on national level data and making assumptions, but really doing Montana specific work and bringing it together. And so I think for me, a big action step, I just sent Bree a message. I was just like, oh my gosh, we need to make sure that this gets up on the website as soon as possible. And I think that this is just such a good launching point for a lot more of this kind of work. So thank you for that great presentation.
Thank you, Anna. Glad to hear it. What else? What are some ahas or thoughts about next steps?
I'd like to, oh, please go ahead.
Are you sure?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. This is Matt Kelly with the Montana Public Health Institute. As I was watching this, I was thinking about some of the work that's happening in communities. We've certainly heard from community leaders, public health leaders, particularly in tribal communities, about the value of being able to measure some of the positive aspects of what's happening, because often some of the things that we measure at, sort of writ large don't really translate in tribal communities and other places. And they're looking for ways to measure that. And I'm just wondering, one, your thoughts on sort of I don't know if efficacy is the right word, but the relevance of measuring this sort of data at the community level, either county or some other level, and two, if that's even possible with the data that you have.
Scott and Jeff.
Scott, why don't you jump in? Yeah.
Sure. I think it's a really important point. One thing that we did try to do was just look at, maybe rural health in general. Seems to be an area that we need to focus more on as a field. We didn't have an opportunity to get into Indigenous or Native American health as much as we would like to with these data. I think that's an important point, though, for anytime we are collecting data, is oversampling the communities that are perhaps more at risk for these types of things. And it takes a lot of effort, but I think in the long run, as you're noting, it's quite worth it. Unfortunately, not too much more we can do with these current BRFIS data, at least not that I can think of right off the top of my head, but always interested in exploring options for doing so.
Matt, what I heard you saying too, Scott, maybe you could address this. Could it be broken down smaller to like community level is what I heard you saying. Do we have the cells or the numbers? Is that what you were asking, Matt?
Yeah, I think I'm asking that. And I just think that there's potentially that, there are many communities, hospitals, and local health departments who are regularly engaging their community in conversations about improving the overall health of their community. And this data could be a pretty potent way to get it in the hands of the right people in these communities to push these conversations forward in ways that give people, it's one thing for us to have an aha moment. It's even more powerful when you got community members having an aha moment. It's like, I don't have to focus on ACEs. I have the opportunity to focus on some things that I have control over. I just think that's really powerful. And if you can get it at the local level, that can be even more effective. It's not always essential. Sometimes you can just say, hey, look at our Montana data, but I wanted to at least explore that.
This is Jolene Jennings from Lewis and Clark Public Health. Matt, I couldn't agree more. Most of us are working on community health improvement plans, and we're identifying substance use disorders as a primary area to start tracking, and the binge drinking and all that is really on our target. So I'd love to have a county breakdown. And I just have one question too I'd like to ask, is I had to jump on the meeting about 10 minutes later on the presentation late. So I'm sorry I missed a little bit, and trying to balance a couple things right now as I'm getting ready for an RFP meeting with for a crisis facility here. But one question I have is into the research specifically. I might have missed it where you talked about the individuals that were measured for the PCEs. Were they the same individuals who were measured for ACEs too?
I'll jump in on to start this. Thank you, Jolene. And you didn't really miss that. We did. Yeah, that wasn't something you missed, that we didn't cover that too well. In the Wisconsin study, the answer would be yes. The Wisconsin BRFIS had both the ACEs module and the PCE module in the same data set to allow that comparison. The Montana data set did not. And it's just for different limitations. The ACEs module was in a previous year. The PCEs were a standalone. So we weren't able to actually make that comparison at this point, but that could be a recommendation for future. And there are other states that are starting to look at that that we're talking to that are continuing to want to move forward with this. So that's a great question, and thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I just want to note that it's 2 minutes after noon, and I want to respect everybody's time. I know we had an hour set aside, and I'm so grateful that so many people could attend. But I just wanted to kind of point out that it's afternoon. I'm happy to stay for a couple more minutes to just keep the space open. But also if people are feeling pulled away to other things, we won't be offended if you need to hop off for your lunch hour. So just wanted to note that it's a couple minutes after 12 and to thank our presenters and thank everyone for being here in case anybody needs to leave to their next appointment.
Yeah, thank you all for being here so much, and come to the SHIP ACEs resiliency meeting and we will continue this conversation because this is where the action is going to happen. So you want to contribute the future of this work together, that's where we're going to have that conversation. So we hope
feel free to type your email in the chat box before you leave if you'd like to be invited to that future meeting. That's a great point, Bree. Thank you.
I would just like to interject briefly that in Lincoln County, we are utilizing as much as we can right now, the positive community norms science. We're certainly finding challenges, but through Lincoln County Unite for Youth and the Spring Up communities, which have been built under the framework of communities that care, we are reaching out to the youth, but also trying to reach out and get more parent involvement. That seems to be our biggest challenge, is parent involvement, but we're working on it, and we're using everything we've been learning in the last year from the Montana Institute and the positive community norms. And I want to thank you all for all the work you do. You're helping make our jobs more fulfilling and easier. However, like I said, there are still challenges, but thank you all so much.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you for what you do.
Okay, well, I have the captive audience. I'm going to plug the Montana Children's Health Data Dashboard that's linked up in the chat. We built this dashboard with the scientists behind this research several years ago. It was a long project to bring in a lot of different measures that have consistent availability year after year, in the effort to really help those of us to care deeply about maternal child health that show up at the community health improvement planning meetings, that show up at the coalition meetings, wondering how do we measure our work consistently at a local level? How do we show that our coalition work is making a difference? Montana Budget and Policy Center and the Kids Count dashboard picked up the project and have committed to sustaining this access to this data. It's not perfect, but it's coming, it's there. There's only just a few pieces and holes left. And so that's kind of the wraparound vision as we get to this. And let's start to really look at what has evidence base to start to get to these 7 PCEs that we measured. And let's look at what we're already doing in Montana and let's build from there. Let's make it obvious what all the good stuff going on, and let's promote the heck out of it, and let's start there. So thank you, everybody. This was a huge celebration day for me personally. Tearing up. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bree. Have a good day, everyone.